So next we're giving an opportunity to share the knowledge to Michael Borkin, and we are turning on his sound. And welcome, Doctor.
Dimitri.
Yeah, nice to see you here. Well, you have the opportunity to present in live, so let's go. You're welcome.
Well, thank you. And thank you for including me this year. You know, originally last October, Constantine and I were discussing this, and we were planning on spending this month together in Russia. And so I'm hoping that there will be some semblance of normalcy next year and we'll all be able to get together. I really miss seeing everybody and the networking. It would have been a wonderful thing to get together, but here we are at different parts of the world. Welcome from Los Angeles. So I'm on the front line as far as the US is concerned, as far as COVID, race riots, as well as such a dramatic change in the environment from all aspects that the tension is thick enough you can actually cut it with a knife. What I'd like to talk to you about today is the long-reaching aspects of what we're dealing with on all levels, three-dimensionally, because this is not just about a virus. This is about an attack on all levels, psychologically as well as physiologically. My studies and research the last 20 years have been dedicated specifically to stress. So I'm going to give you some insights into what I'm seeing and what the long-term aspects may be. Hang on here, gang. There we go. Everybody's aware at this point, or you should be, of the basic elements that we're dealing with as it relates to COVID-SARS19. However, I wanted to give you some insight because there are some tip-offs, some clinical pearls as far as things that you should know that will give you the ability to determine early on between traditional observation diagnostics as well as using BioWell. One of the first things that we see using an oximeter is a drop in normal oxygen saturation. The oxygen concentrations start to drop before the symptoms are observant in most cases. So using an oximeter to screen patients definitely can be helpful if you have baseline. Temperature, of course. However, there are neurologic aspects to the virus, and in the initial stages, there is a report of a large group losing their sense of taste and smell. It turns out that if, in fact, you lose the sense of taste and smell early on, it's giving some indication as to the severity of the virus itself. And the chances are you're going to experience some pretty severe symptomology, including those of neurologics, short-term and long-term. Sudden constipation, change in bowel habit, diarrhea for no reason whatsoever. This attacks the gastrointestinal tract, and it is spread. It is found in the stool. And so there are far-reaching implications as far as transmission is concerned that hasn't even been discussed. There is this phenomenal pressure, all right? Yes, Constantine. You can't see my presentation?
No, we can't see your presentation. So please stop sharing screen. Sharing screen again and find your presentation.
Okay, Michael, you have to click share the screen and then select the top left option, the desktop or whatever is written on the top left. Green button in the Zoom. Green button first in the Zoom and then select.
No, I've got to go back into the Zoom here.
Yes. Let's start from the beginning. In the Zoom, green
Gotcha.
button, the green button. Okay, now we can see your presentation. You can start sharing like F5 or...
You see the first slide here?
Yeah, we can see the post-pandemic syndrome.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay, I'm glad I answered the phone. Thank you, Constantine. And I'll start again. So, as it relates to the symptomology, there is a tremendous amount of pressure that you'll start to feel within the chest, or a patient will complain of that feels like a stable weight, such as a dog sitting on your chest. An unusual headache affecting one of the eyes, it's unilateral, and an unexplained fatigue that sets in. Now, those with hypertension and diabetes are actually at the highest risk. Here in the United States, March 26th started the lockdown. And the point I want to make is that you don't have to be infected to be affected. That between the emotional psychological attack that began with the media early on in February, along with going into a lockdown, it put a certain amount of physiologic stress as well as psychological stress. The changes that take place when we do change our routine and we go into a situation like lockdown is pretty unique, because all of our core aspects, regulatory aspects, reduce. There is a down regulation as far as the metabolism. So we're more likely to gain weight at the same caloric intake. Our oxygen utilization, circulation actually decreases, and indoor environmental toxins do play into the fact that we're exposed to this at a much higher rate, being in the same environment over an extended period of time. There are a lot of changes that take place within the microbiome, a lot of which is below the radar. That's why I say look for changes in bowel activities. Dietary consumption actually can change because we give ourselves, from a psychological standpoint, permission to do and to eat whatever it is that in most cases we wouldn't normally. One of the things I try to stress to my patients is that consumption of sugar, junk foods during this period of time is going to weaken us. There is a shift that takes place as far as the environmental microbiome. And that's something that I will go into more detail in the presentation that'll be online. The Harvard study, longest study as it relates to adult behavior and longevity. concluded after 80 years, 2 years ago, and indicated that we are social beings, and that those that were in good relationships with a spouse that they could depend on, close network as far as friends and family, those that were happy at the age of 50 were much healthier at the age of 80 than those that were introverted, that didn't socialize, and in most cases, they did not even live to the age of 80. So we are social beings. Bonding is extremely, extremely important. And if we don't bond with other human beings, we will bond with something. And in many cases, it's a substance. The state of hypervigilance, when you're in a state of inescapable stress for an extended period of time, we lock into an endless loop known as the pregnenolone steal. And this is when adrenal corticoid, or the adrenal hormone utilization, actually shifts, and we start to cannibalize certain hormones, such as sex hormones, for survival purposes. Now, depending on where the person was, you know, if we were walking a thin line with one foot over into that area of adrenal dysregulation, adrenal fatigue, then of course the psychologic and physiologic changes will push us right over into the adrenal exhaustive phase. So we're in an extremely vulnerable state. Otherwise, it's a 120-day process typically. However, at 120 days, what we're seeing now is changes from an epigenetic standpoint. Viruses do not change genetics. However, they do change epigenetic expression. And what's important to understand is those that are affected, that are infected prior to the age of reproduction, when they do reproduce, the epigenetic expression will be passed on to the next generation, and speculation based on a multitude of studies indicates that this will actually see an epigenetic cycle of at least 5 generations. That means we're going to be seeing certain aspects of this physiologically from an epigenetic standpoint for the next 100+ years. The long-term effects of hypervigilance can be devastating because the sex hormones are used in reserve to a great extent. So when the body dysregulates and we're locked into a state of inescapable stress, we will convert sex hormones such as estrogen, progesterone in a female, testosterone and the androgens in a male, back to adrenal corticoids for stress purposes. We get locked into a certain physiologic mode where we don't flourish. We simply exist and survive. This can have tremendous impact on the peripheral nervous system and upregulate the sympathetic activity, which we're going to see in the BioWell in just a few minutes. This sympathetic arousal causes changes in the neurotransmitter pathways, leading to dopamine, serotonin, GABA, glutamate, histamine. So I have to explain to you my story. Fortunate, unfortunate enough, I wanted to be the first one exposed, so I would have some experience in order to discuss this. At the end of last year, I spent the holidays working on a project, on a product launch that was scheduled for the beginning of January. And I worked straight through Christmas and New Year's. And in fact, I worked through those holidays in order to get all of the products, everything that I needed for my presentations in Thailand. And I was very much organized, but extremely stressed. I was on my way to Thailand and China to launch a new product line. And I was already in a fatigue state. Last year was extremely difficult and daunting. And by December, I was in a state of adrenal dysregulation and really pushed it to the extent. And of course, I did what I had to, and on January the 3rd, I showed up at Los Angeles International and got on a flight to Beijing, China. This is at that time, or just prior to me traveling, and you'll see that my energy, look, sound, that the energetic field, the body electric was strong. However, I was in a vulnerable state. You can see in the balance mode that the adrenal stress level was extremely high, that I was already compromised from a respiratory standpoint. The spleen was overlooked, and I was dealing with a toothache or a tooth infection that was going to play a much bigger role in this. We're going to see on the BioWell how the BioWell actually can establish a pattern. And we're not looking at one specific indicator. We're actually looking at a pattern involving the immune system, the adrenal response or stress mechanisms, the nervous systems, the endocrine system, as well as spleen and liver overloads. The first 10 days, most individuals are asymptomatic. I felt some fatigue. However, I was presenting on a daily basis, in some cases to groups over 1,000 people. I had a tremendous amount of energy that I was able to pull from that audience. However, I was definitely pushing it. However, when I started to feel the initial symptomology, I made a promise to myself that I was going to see this project through, and I would not get sick until after the presentations were over. You can see that at day 10, that there were tremendous vulnerabilities. And in looking into the research, COVID-SARS19 actually hijacks the mitochondrial function and uses the mitochondrial output of ATP as well as the replication of the cell in order to reproduce as itself. It's robbing the body to a great extent of the production of ATP, and it becomes noticeable to a great extent because it reduces endurance dramatically. The first signs are not unilateral. There is a specific pattern involving the chest, the throat, the head. There are body aches, and there seems to be a psychological impact that if you are prone to obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, or depression, that it is exacerbated at this point. This is a chakra analysis from that same point at day 10. And you'll see that, again, there's this tremendous pattern that's established, showing the extreme compensation of all of the chakras to the attack. This is when symptoms came on, and you can see that every primary system was attacked. Those systems that were already weakened were utilized in order to manipulate other systems in the body and downregulate, especially as far as immune modulation, to allow the virus to thrive. At the peak, I found this amazing, that the sympathetic arousal, and what we find as far as the stress analysis within the BioWell, was off the chart as it relates to the amount of anxiety that it creates, disarray within the autonomic nervous system. Maintaining normal energy output and a balance that's close, but again, you see the compensation that's taking place that's very, very specific. There is a certain aspect of dehydration and volume depletion, which is demineralization and the loss of fluids that takes place because of the adrenal stress that takes place at the peak, further exacerbating symptomology and adding to some of the mental confusion and the symptoms overall. Now you'll see at this time, at the worst of the symptomology, we're not really seeing a complete breakdown as far as reduction in energy. We're seeing a real mix as far as upregulation and downregulation in order to compensate. Well, I wound up spending 11 days in Hong Kong. I was on my way back from Bangkok and realized that there was no way I was going to be able to survive another 12 hours to the United States, and decided to get off the plane in Hong Kong and stay there until I felt well enough to travel. So 11 days later, I felt well enough. I headed back to the state. I still had some residuals as far as a runny nose, a mild cough that continued. However, my energy was good. You see that there are no breaks in the body electric. As far as the autonomics are concerned, they dropped back down into the optimal range. The energy was good, balance was good, but the compensation was still taking place. At 45 days, systems started to break down. And there was a reoccurrence as far as the viral symptoms. This was quite unusual because it was already 45 days out. So it seemed as if I had been re-exposed. At 60 days, there was still this pattern involving the throat, the immune system. We saw the adrenal stress diminish here. However, the adrenals in my endocrine analysis showed a very, very high level of activity, abnormal activity, with cortisol being extremely high and DHEA being non-existent. At 90 days, this pattern continued, and we could see the immune system, the cytokine storm that was taking place affecting the sirtuins. At 4 months, I broke down and it became observable, and I went into a state of adrenal exhaustion. Now, I had reduced my work dramatically, and a good portion of this time was during the lockdown, so I had plenty of rest. It didn't matter. The virus recycles. It seems that it becomes dormant for a period of time, and there are many elements, some that we can speculate on, everything from vaccinations to electromagnetics to 5G to environmental toxins to psychological abuse. All of these elements play into it, and it appears that The system is affected long-term. You'll note that at 150 days, all the systems were greatly reduced, downregulated, and exhausted. So the virus had continued to wreak havoc for several months after. Now, I'm not the only one. When I started to see this taking place with me, I was looking at the research, and I found a study from June published in the Netherlands with a study of 1,600 individuals who all reported that they were healthy prior to getting infected. However, only 6%, 4 months later, felt as if they were still healthy. The great majority felt that they still had health issues months after being exposed. Now, Constantine had mentioned in his opening presentation about the use of dynamic detection. Dynamic detection utilizes BioWell in order to determine how to utilize supplementation with surgical precision. I've been a user of applied kinesiology, or AK, muscle testing for the better part of 40 years. I'm considered one of the best AK testers probably on the planet. I'm extremely good at this. However, BioWell is better. It took me several years of using BioWell side by side with other diagnostics, using my own diagnostic laboratory from an endocrine standpoint, metabolomic standpoint, as well as using AK. And what I found is that the BioWell, if you know what to look for, is as accurate as the mass spec units that we use within the laboratory, and much more precise than anything that I could ever do using muscle testing. What's unique, and that I found, is that it's best to test using the BioWell by taking a saliva sample from the individual, placing it in the dynamic detection halter, and placing this over the heart chakra. And all testing is done over the heart chakra. We can look specifically at the primary targets of supplementation. And I say that from the standpoint of the virus, the neuroendocrine dysregulation, the downregulation, the oxygenation, the cytokine and SIRT1 aspect from a genetic standpoint, the effect on the microbiome, the immune modulation, and our ability to reproduce, or I should say repair. From a neuroendocrine standpoint, using DD, these are some of the things that we look for. And one of the first things that we'll look for is phosphatidylcholine, and balance the phosphatidylcholine. This will usually bring the cognitive aspects back. I found that pregnenolone and riboflavin are the primary cofactors that can be extremely, extremely helpful in pulling somebody out of this loop, this pattern of the dysregulation associated with the virus. Using an oximeter in the office has been extremely helpful when we have established baseline with patients. These are oxygen supplements. Pangamic acid, vitamin B15, was created in Russia. It increases the oxygen binding sites and can be extremely, extremely useful in dealing with the virus. As you can see, there is an array of antioxidants that are absolutely essential, and micro and macro minerals that are extremely important as it relates to the volume depletion, dehydration that I talked about earlier. The sirtuins are unique because there is this upregulation of the immune modulation at the peak of symptoms. And what has been found that's so unique is that we want to maintain through the prophylactic phases, trying to prevent and reduce symptomology. However, at the peak of symptoms, the mistake is to continue to boost the immune modulation, enhancing the cytokine storm. The idea at day 10 approximately is to downregulate the immune modulation and to stop using all of those immune enhancers that you were using prior. Balancing the immune system is a tremendous balancing act. And vitamin D, I can't stress enough, 60% of the world's population have dysregulation, epigenetic dysregulation, and genetic polymorphism associated with the vitamin D receptor gene, the VDR, which means that 6 out of 10 individuals do require supplementation, even if they live in a sunny environment. The antioxidants, and I can't stress to you enough, the use of fucoidins. These are seaweeds. These are the vegetarian equivalent of fish oils. However, fish oils oxidize. If they don't oxidize in the processing in the product, they will oxidize in the gastrointestinal tract. Fucoidins don't and provide the same omega fatty acids and has a tremendous impact as far as reducing the inflammatory response and boosting the immune modulation. Another supplement that I have found absolutely essential during this time is colloidal silver. And I'm using a coated silver in a humidifier and misting the entire environment, as well as ingesting orally, intranasally, using the colloidal silver in conjunction with my hand sanitizer. I can't stress enough, cannot overdose on the use of the colloidal silver through this. And I would certainly say that it's a very, very good investment in reducing the impact of this virus. I can't stress to you enough the impact on the microbiome and the supplementation that should be tested, including the oligosaccharides, the primary constituents of mother's milk that are now available for supplemental purposes, along with a broad spectrum probiotic, the use of digestive enzymes to reduce some of the stress associated with the digestive process, primarily with that of proteins. We don't realize that the greatest amount of energy used in the body is within the parietal cells of the stomach, meaning that the digestive process uses a tremendous amount of energy. And we need to enhance this in order to ensure that the gastrointestinal tract, our first line of defense, is able to render viruses and bacteria inactive within the gut. Upregulation of growth hormone. Repair, extremely, extremely important. There are a lot of growth hormone fractions These peptides can be used very, very safely without causing some of the issues associated with using actual human recombinant growth hormone, somatotropin, GHRP2, GHRP6, fraction 176191, and body protection complex, or BPC 157. I've been using these with patients for years. I use these a lot going through this process. I'm using them now, and it's having a really, really positive impact. The secretagogues, arginine, ornithine, lysine, glutamine, carnosine, and carnitine, all extremely, extremely important as it relates to repair. We need to continually detoxify. In the research, there is indication that if you are at a high threshold as it relates to toxicity, that when exposed to the virus, the actual detoxification that takes place and the die-off that's associated with the destruction of the cells as you go through this process of the virus can be devastating and overload all of the excretory aspects of the body and create long-acting aspects. So continuing detox before, during, after, extremely important. We will be dealing with this for many years to come. We've entered into this amazing relationship, and the virus is affecting us on a multitude of levels, physiologically, psychologically, epigenetically. We're extremely vulnerable, and there is speculation. Many of you have insight into some of the other possible factors associated from an electromagnetic or biochemical standpoint of manipulation. Again, this is an attack. We're now seeing about the 6th mutation. Looking this morning, we've exceeded 11 million infected worldwide. This will certainly continue. I think Constantine brought up in his opening presentation the influenza of 1918. And what's unique is that the influenza of 1918 continued until it had infected everybody on the face of the planet before it became dormant. So there is a very good possibility we're going to see long-term aspects as far as the infection itself. However, all of the factors that play into living in a world that has changed to such a great extent that it's changing on a daily basis. I mentioned earlier, I'm in Los Angeles. We complicated this with race riots. It's really been an interesting time. Vaccination is not going to take place anytime soon. However, we need to be very, very cautious as it relates to the powers to be when it comes to vaccination, because it is believed that vaccination will be accompanied with a RFID chip, putting us on the grid and further taking away more of our freedoms. We will cross that path when we come to it. One last thing I'd like to leave with you is something that is usually overlooked. Once you recover, and I should say throughout the process, you should be using new toothbrushes that you are using. You want to put into hydrogen peroxide overnight, and you want to throw out your toothbrush after you've recovered and stop reinfecting yourself. Using BioWell dynamic detection and the amazing insight that we have as energetic practitioners, we can create miracles. I'm sending everybody my love. I appreciate you watching. Constantine, I appreciate you inviting me, and the Congress, Dimitri. I look forward to seeing everybody next year in person, and I look forward to giving you all a hug. And with that, I wish you well, stay healthy, and lots of love.
Thank you very much, Dr. Borkin. That was a very good presentation. And even though some people are not so educated in endocrinology and the names of all these things, I think they should learn more about their bodies, about the chemistry of their bodies, and use your advices wisely, specifically in these dangerous times.